Welcome to COIQ, where you learn how health innovators maximize their success. I'm your host, Dr. Roxy, founder of Legacy DNA and international best-selling author of How Health Innovators Maximize Market Success. Through candid conversations with health innovators, early adopters, and influencers, you'll learn how to bring your innovation from idea to startup to market domination. And now, let's jump into the latest episode of COIQ. Welcome back, COIQ listeners. On today's episode, I have Lonny Stormo with me. He is the CEO for Pop Diabetes. Welcome to the show, Lonny.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, it's good to chat with you today. So tell us a little bit about your background and what you've been innovating lately, just to kind of give our listeners and viewers some context for our conversation today.
Absolutely. So I'm an engineer by background, so I love creating things, and spent 30 years at Medtronics, the biggest implantable medical device company in the world. And you can imagine over 30 years, I did a lot of different things, from design to development, operations, and led a business unit for a number of years. But I left Medtronics 5 years ago as one of the co-founders of POPs, because we saw a different view of healthcare and where healthcare is going. And really, we wanted to kind of flip healthcare on its head and enable people to take care of their own health using a technology platform. So that's what we're working on, is kind of democratizing healthcare.
That's exciting. So where are you in the innovation process right now?
Yep. So we went through development of a product. We got FDA clearance of a product. We got clinical study data on our product. And about a year ago, launched our product into the marketplace. So we're just at that point of, helping people understand who POPs are, get our visibility out there, make sure our product market fit is correct. And that's kind of where we're at in the process today.
That's great. So Lonny, as you kind of think back in these last 5 years, what were some of the decisions that you've made so far that you think have been game-changing decisions or really pivotal decisions that's led to the success that you've accumulated so far?
Yeah, I would highlight probably 2 or 3. So the first one was, when we started, we held lots of focus groups, and we literally talked to hundreds of people in focus groups, people with diabetes, people that are helping people care for diabetes. And what we were trying to really understand is, so why is it that diabetes is not being managed so well today? Over 50% of the people with diabetes don't meet the ADA recommended goals. It makes diabetes the most expensive chronic condition we have in the United States. And the number of people with diabetes is not shrinking, unfortunately. And so what we were trying to understand is, why is something not working? Because there's lots of different apps and tools and so forth out there. And what we really wanted to do was land on the right spot in terms of how to enable people to manage their own diabetes. And so when I talked about flipping healthcare on its head and democratizing healthcare, what we started with was this idea that what we wanted to do was give people a technology platform that's a simple consumer-oriented type of product, just like we have democratized travel through simple technology platforms in your phone. We wanted to do the same thing in healthcare. And so reaching that kind of sweet spot of really creating an experience that people would actually use, but at the same time could actually be helpful to them in managing their healthcare, has been one of our, key things that we talk about every day, is our virtual coach who we have, Mina is her name, in the app. Is Mina doing this thing now going to essentially drive people away, because now we've become too heavy-handed healthcare and we're not thinking like a consumer anymore? So kind of reaching that kind of sweet spot of creating an experience people actually use on a daily basis and still help them. That's one of the key things that we needed to land on. And then the biggest one that we needed to think about all the time over the last 5 years on the business side is, what's the right business model here? Right? People ask us all the time, well, this feels like a consumer product. Are you selling this direct to consumer? And the answer is no, we're not. And then traditionally in like the diabetes space, what companies like us would do is market to physicians, to have physicians prescribe this product to their patients, or market to hospitals and clinics and so forth. And we're not doing that. So what we decided to do was really focus on selling this as a subscription service to health plans and or to the employer clients for those health plans. And so it becomes more of an employee benefit in that way, and we save the employers money. And so looking at what the right business model was, and looking like what the right product fit was. Those were the two biggest key decisions that we've made over the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm. So kind of peeling the layers back of what you're talking about. So the first thing that I think you mentioned was around co-creation and really in integrating this entire product development, product management process, integrating those stakeholders. What was that like for you? Because I have conversations with people all the time that, maybe are a little bit more resistant to it than others. And sometimes it goes really well. And sometimes there's a lot of myths or pitfalls of including those stakeholders in the process. So what was your experience and maybe some lessons that you learned along the way?
Yeah, the biggest lesson I learned when I think about, you say lessons learned and I start smiling is because what we did was we spent a lot of time talking to people with diabetes. And as we were developing prototypes, testing it with people with diabetes and so forth, and then we thought we had this product and we had the labeling around the product and everything, and we were ready to start a clinical study. But before we did, we wanted to maybe do some more formal human factors testing. And so we hired a consulting agency to work with us, and they have the two-way mirror or whatever. And we're sitting behind this two-way mirror while the people are starting to try to use the product by themselves in the other room. And I just wanted to pull my hair out. It was a frustrating experience because they didn't get what we had done. And for us, as being part of that co-creation, we were like, how can they not see this, or how can they not understand this? But and I think what we learned in that process was us being part of the focus groups and so forth is a really easy way to skew the results of what you're seeing there. And when you give something to somebody kind of, as we say now, in the wild, you never know what people are going to do. They do completely unexpected things. And so that was a big learning for us, and something that we continually remind ourselves, even when we make a small change in our app or whatever. Now we know, okay, now we have to have somebody test this and make sure that, it really works the way we think it's going to work, because we're never not surprised when we do that. Yeah. That was probably our biggest learning in the co-creation process.
Yeah. I think that that's so important. That you just mentioned about having a third party involved. And because one of the things that I see happen really often is when the innovator is doing that kind of co-creation themselves without including an outside entity, it's really easy to infuse all of the bias that you have and kind of set it up in such a way where you're just really getting your participants to validate what you've already developed or the ideas that you already have, instead of really teasing out that rejection, and those things that they don't like and that they don't understand. And so, we're only hurting ourselves if we, infuse our bias. And I think one way to do that is by having the third party company involved in that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It is so hard to remove yourself from an innovation that you're creating. It's like your baby, right?
Yes.
And you want everybody to love your baby and tell you how beautiful it is. And it's really difficult to hear when it's not, right? And to do that, removed from it a step, is an important step in the process. And we continue to learn that all the time and value that all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other thing that I want to talk about here is I get the sense that what you're doing is although it's diabetes management, and like you said, there's a lot of solutions that are on the market, that you use the co-creation to really figure out very deeply and intimately where the unmet need was, so that way when you were going to market, that you were bringing something that had a market need for it instead of a Me Too product.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, so as an example, when we did focus groups to begin with, there were more than 1,000 apps out there for diabetes management in the App Store. And so we started, talking to people about using apps to manage their diabetes. And one of the things that we found was so, astounding is that we actually worked with a physician to publish this at American Diabetes Association, because what we found was 90% of people said they wanted to use an app to manage their diabetes. And we're like, okay, great. There's 1,000 apps out there. Which one are you using? And what we found was only 10% of them were actually using an app to manage their diabetes. And was, how can it possibly be that there's a big gap between 90% and 10%? Yeah. And the reason is because the apps don't really meet the needs of what the people are doing. And so it's one thing to say, hey, I'm making an app to, help, people with diabetes, but then you kind of quickly find out we're not actually meeting the needs of people. And what one of the themes we found across that was that the apps created more burden than they did benefit. And so what all these apps were doing was asking people to log information and track this and enter this and do this. And the benefit wasn't really for the person that was actually putting the effort into it. It was for gathering data for somebody else or to send it to a physician or something. And so then people do that for 2 or 3 weeks and they go, well, I'm not getting anything out of this. I'm just going to quit doing it. And so one of the mantras we've used from the very beginning is more benefit than burden. So anything we ask the person with diabetes to do, there better be some resulting ROI benefit from that for that person to do that action. Otherwise, it's not worth it to do it. And so, one of the things that we're trying to roll into our product as we think about it is, one, not everybody's the same. There's going to be super motivated people to manage your diabetes and people that aren't so motivated. And you can't have one app that kind of addresses everybody. It just doesn't work. So we try to have me and our virtual coach personalized based on motivation and kind of what you're doing. And the other thing is try to, and we have much more road to cover in this area, but try to use artificial intelligence to create more benefit without always asking the person to do more things. And so that's going to be, I think, the challenge for healthcare as we go forward in general is we need to always be thinking about what benefit are we creating for a person versus just what are we asking them to do.
Which doesn't seem like rocket science, but it's really important to point out and remind ourselves, right?
I totally agree. It isn't rocket science. Although I will say, when I talked about like using artificial intelligence, I think one of the things as artificial intelligence becomes more and more use in the healthcare industry, so far a lot of AI kind of talk has happened about terms of how do we make doctors more efficient, or how do we take an X-ray and point out to the physician, this is the area you should look, right? That's how AI has been used a lot. Yep. But what we need to do more and more of is start getting AI to help individuals like ourselves take care of ourselves better. And I think that's happening, right? I mean, we're one of the companies that are trying to do that, but other companies are trying to do that too. And that to me is going to be in when AI really becomes useful for individuals like us.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So what was it like for you pitching your story to the investor market or even to the market that's paying for this solution when you're going into a market that is already seems to be saturated and trying to differentiate what you have to offer from the, let's say the 1,000 of apps that are, kind of cobwebs right now?
Right. Yeah, that's a really, really good point, and it's one that we've been thinking about and battling, for the last 5 years. Because as soon as you say diabetes, I've heard it 5 years ago, and I still hear it today. Oh, there's a lot of things out there for diabetes already. How can you possibly be any different? And sometimes, unfortunately, and this is just more work I need to figure out how to do better, is even after I make the pitch, sometimes people say to me, well, if you boil right down what you have, you really have another sensor and another app. That's what everybody has. And it's like, yes, if you boil it down to that low point, that is true. But you need to look kind of at the essence of that. And so what we try to do is always kind of work on our messaging of how can we make this easier to do. So as an example, we're doing all of our pitches, whether investor or sales pitches today virtually. And so one of the things we've done in doing that is we've added a webcam so we can actually show people directly the difference between kind of the traditional test kit that's out there and our device to get a blood glucose measurement. And when people see that, we've actually gotten feedback from people. That's really valuable when you do that. And so when people can see the difference, then they start to think, okay, now it's different, rather than just seeing it on a slide. And then, the whole
makes it more real.
Yeah, it becomes more real. And then the whole idea of, what we do is we ask a person. So like if I was pitching to you, I would ask you, would you rather have a live coach connected to your device, kind of watching you all the time? Or would you rather have a virtual coach in your phone giving you feedback kind of, when it's appropriate? And more often than not, people say, yeah, I don't want somebody kind of watching me and so forth. And we're like, well, that's the experience you're giving your people with diabetes today. Is that what you want to give them? So it's how do you make it more real to you as an individual?
Yeah. So I know that you've your story and your brand has evolved, and those are such fundamental pieces to the commercial success. So take us through that journey. And I think for any brand, there's an evolution process, but as a CEO with an engineering background, kind of help us understand what that was like in the beginning, and then what were the results of that first approach, and then what you did differently, and kind of now how you're getting different results.
Yeah, I absolutely smile when you ask that question because, you see this often in innovation companies, right? Where you have three engineers, which is our case, three engineers get together and come up with this idea. And at the same time, we're branding it. And that's a terrible idea, but it happens all the time.
Dangerous.
We did come out with a very engineering branded, name and logo and colors and our website and so forth. We're very, very fundamental, basic kind of engineering kind of stuff. And so that's what we ran with for a while. And that worked fine for our early investor conversations and so forth. And I think investors early, as they're looking at companies like ourselves, realize that, okay, this isn't the commercialized brand yet. And then when we got closer to commercialization, we hired a marketing and brand director. And she just completely came in and changed everything that we had done. And it was fantastic. Every time she showed us something, we were like, oh, we love it, So we knew what we wanted. We just didn't know how to create it. And so bringing somebody in with that kind of point of view and that expertise and that thinking completely transformed what we wanted to do. And she did a good job by saying, well, what is it we're trying to do? What are we trying to be? When I talk about things like democratizing healthcare and putting healthcare in people's hands, so she came up with the tagline, own your life. Right? Which as soon as she showed it to us, we were like, that's beautiful. We love it, kind of thing. Because that's exactly what we're trying to do is you own your life. We're not going to manage you. And so she got it. And so that transformation really helped. And I can tell you one of our board members who was the lead investor in our Series A, they told us after the fact, I didn't know this at the time, but they said after, Tamara came in and kind of rebranded everything and stuff, they said, yeah, actually, one of the things that's almost stopped us from investing in your company was your website and how you guys looked and so forth, brand-wise. We decided to go ahead, and it was actually their investment that allowed us to actually make that transformation.
Right.
But so that does matter to people, whether it's investors and so forth. And now today, we get great feedback from our clients and from the people that use our system and so forth that they love our brand.
Hey, it's Dr. Roxy here with a quick break from the conversation. Are you trying to figure out what moves you need to make to survive and thrive in the new COVID economy? I want every health innovator to find their most viable and profitable pivot strategy, which is why I created the COVID Proof Your Business Pivot Kit. The Pivot Kit is a step-by-step framework that helps you find your best pivot strategy. It walks you through 6 categories you need to examine for a 360-degree view of your business. I call them the 6 critical pivot lenses. As you make your way through this comprehensive kit, you'll be armed with the tools, tips, and strategies you need to make sure you can pivot with speed without missing out on critical details and opportunities. Learn more at legacy-dna.com/kit. So do you feel like you're gaining more traction in all of in the conversations and the work that you're doing because of this new story that you're telling?
Absolutely, without a doubt. So I'll give you 2 examples. So one example that we continue to get great feedback on is, so when our competition signs up a person with diabetes to use this system, they call them members or they call them participants. And what we decided to do with the tagline, Own Your Life, when somebody signs up and use our solution, we call them an owner. Now that may sound like nothing, right? But when you actually say that to a client, they're like, oh, I love that. And, it immediately gets across how you're coming at this differently than other people are coming at it. And so those little things really, really do matter as you're kind of pitching out the company. And then the second thing I'll mention is, so one of the focuses that we put, and as we talk about kind of our sales funnel all the way down to an individual, kind of call to action, we put a lot of effort into our digital presence. And so we want what is Pops to be, what is our brand and so forth to be known no matter what your favorite thing is, if it's Instagram or LinkedIn or our website. And so we get feedback regularly from people that, oh, I love your website. I love the kind of, the casual language you use and things like that. And our, SEO, ratings have gone, skyrocket in the last 6 months. We have 10,000 social media followers, things like that. And so, yeah, that kind of work it's really cool to see that happening. And what's cool about it is I have no idea how to do that, but it's fun watching our team figure out how to do it.
So I think that what you're describing here is, the messaging, the branding, the packaging, and how critical that is to commercial success, that even if you have an incredible technology, that it is not going to sell itself. And, we know that, but that these things are just fundamentally important. And I want to point out what you said in casual language. So time and time again, I think we've made progress as an industry, but there's still a tremendous amount of work to be done with speaking to patients and practitioners like regular people, and instead of the corporate healthcare speak that doesn't resonate with the head and the heart, and it doesn't establish that relatedness and that deeper connection from person to person. It's more like, I'm a healthcare institution and you are the member or the participant, and so it's just brilliant. Great job.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And some of that stems from my own personal bias, right? I mean, I always say nobody strives to be a patient. Nope, that's nobody's goal when they wake up in the morning. I'm going to be a patient today. And I personally hate it when the healthcare industry calls people like me that are living with diabetes a patient. I'm not a patient. I'm a person.
Yeah, right.
I happen to live with diabetes, but that's a condition. Just like if somebody has eyeglasses, and they need those to see better. Well, they're not almost all of a sudden a patient. They're just a person that wears eyeglasses. I'm a person managing my diabetes, and so I think the industry in general needs to make a shift and start thinking of people and not like patients.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So there's two other things that I want to talk about. One is your business model. So you have a unique business model for a healthcare company. So what were some of the things that you wrestled with in kind of determining where you would land and how you would introduce yourself, the business model into the marketplace?
Yeah, so one of the last things that had to fall in place for me personally before I decided to leave my job at Medtronics, which I had a great career there, so why leave, was the business model. Because we thought we had a great idea and a great concept, but I knew that going and getting reimbursement in kind of the traditional healthcare industry would be a huge mountain. I did that at Medtronics with all the resources of Medtronics, and here we were going to have no resources. How are we going to possibly do that? Yeah. So when we kind of figured out that, actually most of the healthcare payments in the United States are happening out of private commercial employers, why not go ask them to pay for this? Because they're the ones that are going to benefit from it when these people are healthier and happier and so forth. So why not ask them to? And so switching our mindset from, oh, you have to go get payer reimbursement and stuff the way healthcare traditionally thinks, to let's go ask the people who really are banking this pocketbook, was a key milestone for us. That was just like light goes on and we're like, okay, now let's go do this. But the challenge of doing that, obviously, is getting everybody to start thinking like that. And at 5 years ago, we weren't selling yet, but in kind of telling people this is what we were going to do, people were like, "What? You're gonna ask employers to pay for this? How is that going to possibly work?" The good news is that employers started to actually take a more active role in trying to find solutions like ourselves. And so now, when we have FDA approval now in the last year and so forth, it's a little bit better position than if we would have been breaking into this and trying to get those employers to, pay us 5 years ago. So that's the good news for us, is that we've made progress in that area about how employers could actually start to pay and benefit from this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you've got some great news. You've got some exciting things that have happened recently. And, I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to share with us, those things. And I think it's incredibly important, especially in this climate that we're in right now. We're hearing a lot about the obstacles and the barriers and the challenges. And so what's happening? What are some of the new highlights that you have going on?
Yeah, like everybody, I think everybody saw basically just a slowdown or a stop or a pause, kind of starting in February and March when COVID-19 hit, because everybody's trying to reassess what does that really mean. And we saw that too. But the good news overall for, I think solutions like ourselves in the digital health space or digital therapeutic space is that COVID-19 has actually elevated those things to be more important. And we're starting to actually realize that and see that now in actual things. And so as an example, we've signed a regional health plan recently that has 1.5 million members to offer POPs out to their commercial clients. And so what that does for us, and we always knew kind of our model of selling was to go from asking employers to pay for this directly to asking their third-party administrators or their ASOs to pay for this and offer it to them, because that's a more scalable model. So now with this contract with the health plan that we have in place, they can go out and offer that to their employer clients without us having to talk to the employer clients. And so that's just a much more scalable way of doing it. They also just launched us in a new insurance product that's out there for their fully insured clients. And they're putting POPs as the only vendor featured in that product because they see us as one way to differentiate that insurance product away from other ones that are out there. And so we are really proud of that. That's really cool that we're getting held up as kind of a differentiating feature. The other side, out besides the commercial health plans, is the partnering opportunities that we're starting to see, because different companies are looking for digital health solutions to partner with. And so we just recently won the Zurich Innovation Challenge regional round at the Asia level. And we're now one of 8 companies globally that Zurich is evaluating for a final, a global winner. And Zurich is a life insurance company, and people might say, well, why are you even talking to a life insurance company? But interestingly, companies like that are interested in offering out digital health to their customers as a way of differentiating themselves. And so that's pretty cool. And likewise, we have, some other partnering opportunities that people are reaching out to us. And I think that's both the credit of, digital health rising due to COVID-19 and credit to kind of our digital presence that we have out there that POPs kind of rises up when people are saying, well, what's out there for diabetes management?
So that's great. Congratulations. And what a better position. There's no better position for you to be in than for different organizations or partners to be able to see your solution as the tool that they can use for differentiation. That's really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. We're proud of it too. And, it helps rise us out of that pack of all the diabetes things that are out there that we talked about a while ago.
So do you have plans to go beyond the U.S.?
Yeah, we actually do. So we have our regulatory approval CE mark that is basically outside the United States. That's already done. And so we have some partner conversations going on with different parts of the world that could open up doors. Specifically, as we talked to Zurich, as I mentioned, we're talking about a pilot in Australia. And that's kind of a next easy place for us to go because of the language and the culture and so forth. And so we'll look for other opportunities like that too.
Okay, great. So one other thing that I want to talk about is you came from a really big organization, and it sounds like you've had a number of different roles that helped you really get a very diverse experience in medical device. And so how did that experience transition or translate into you being an entrepreneur and starting your own company? And, just highlight, I'm sure there's tons of them, but just highlight some of the differences between being part of a large institution and then starting your own small company from scratch.
Yeah, it is a big transition. And so what I've often said to people when I had 30 years at Medtronic and able to do all these different types of roles that I did, from operations to quality to clinical to regulatories, I didn't know it at the time, but I was training to be a CEO of a startup, because as a CEO of a startup or a founder of a startup, you need to know how to do all those different things. And so that was fantastic experience for me. And interestingly, I thought when I left Medtronic as an older person, you can imagine, I'm in my 50s, leaving Medtronic after 30 years, that this was going to be a deficit to me, that investors would never invest in this person that, has only worked at a corporation and he's, not this, young 20-year-old hungry person. But it turned out that I quickly found out that actually having that pedigree of 30 years as a corporate life of Medtronic is my biggest asset. So I never go now without, starting by saying I spent 30 years at Medtronic, because people listen all of a sudden because, okay, this person knows what they're talking about. So
all the millennial startups, startup founders that I talk to always say, and I hope you don't get offended by this, but that the advice that they always get is they need to have some gray hair on their board and their advisory team to give them the credibility that you have.
Yeah, and believe me, I'm not offended by that. I'm just glad you can see I have hair.
Right.
The other example I will give you that I think is always interesting is, so I went from the biggest medical device company in the world, 80,000 people, to when we first started, it was 3 of us, right? And we joke about it now, as there was 3 of us sitting in a garage. And we're all sitting around looking at a computer screen, trying to make some decision about a product or a vendor we were going to use or something. And I remember joking at the time as we were trying to figure it out, and I turned over my shoulder and I said, okay, who's going to make this decision? Because, in a big company, there always seems like there's one more person over your shoulder that's going to make the final decision. But in our case, it was I guess we're going to do it, and even though none of us were experts in this particular area, as a small startup company, you just need to decide, okay, let's do it, and jump in and do it. And so that's the biggest difference that I saw, is there's so many great resources around you at a big company, all this expertise you can call on for these specific topics and so forth, and you just don't have that as a founder in a startup company, and you need to take some risks and make some bold decisions, and you don't always know, but you maybe try to ask a couple people and then you decide.
So as we wrap up here and continuing that conversation point, what advice do you have for your peers, your innovation peers that are in the market right now, in the trenches, either earlier stage, later stage, what do you have to say to them?
Well, I'd say 2 things. One is absolutely put focus on your brand and your messages and your key selling points, not just your product. Because your product won't sell itself. It doesn't matter how good it is. And so that's one key thing, is you need to think big and broad about how you're selling in that whole sales funnel. And then the second thing is, I would say, I always talk about it like building a staircase. You can't jump to the immediate top stair. And I think a lot of people try to do that, and then they fail, and they get frustrated and they quit or whatever think about building your momentum. So what is that first stair step you can get? Maybe it's a win in an accelerator program, or maybe it's a pilot program or something. But once you get that traction, then you build on that one, and you take the next step, and you take the next step, and you take the next step. And it's a hard journey. And I've often told other entrepreneurs that I've talked to since I've done this is, if you're doing this for the money, just stop right now. Don't even do it, because it's too hard for that. It needs to be something you're passionate about, whether it's an idea, whether it's personal to you, or just changing the world is what's important to you. That's the passion you need to have, because it's really tough.
Yes, it is. You need that to be the energy that helps you persevere and stay determined, right, for the cause as you go through all of those challenges and get knocked down and have to stand back up. Yep. A million times.
It's a roller coaster ride.
Yes, definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time. And how can folks get a hold of you if they want to follow up with you after the show?
Yeah, so the easiest way overall to get a hold of us is go to our website, popsdiabetes.com. And if you want to get a hold of me specifically, Twitter might be a good way, at Lonny Stormo.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening. I know you're busy working to bring your life-changing innovation to market, and I value your time and your attention. To save time and get the latest episodes on your mobile device automatically, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate everyone who's been sharing the show with friends and colleagues. See you on the next episode of COIQ.